We are down to our last speaker, a speaker who has been here active in our conference in several roles, because I'm talking about Bret Drake. Bret, with your extensive knowledge of what Mars architecture should look like, and with the previous speakers talking about getting us to Mars and staying on Mars, I will be very, very curious on how you're going to sum this up.
So actually, what the organizers wanted to do today in this section was not for me to speak, but actually to open up the mics to you all. So we want to hear some of your feedback on what you've heard over the last 3 days, 2.5 days. Any thoughts you have, if there are questions, that some of the speakers are still here, and so you may be able to pose some of your questions that you didn't get to some of the speakers. If not, maybe others can take them. If you have comments or questions, please come to a mic so that the people online can hear you. So just on the screen, I just threw down some thoughts for you all, just some of the things that over the last 2.5 days have been discussed. What are some of the goals of human exploration, Mars science, outposts, settlements, saving the civilization, having a second planet. Do you have any thoughts on that? Things like that. NASA's plan. There's a lot of been discussion about the journey to Mars, the famous squid chart. That path of going from where we are today in Earth dependent through the proving ground to actually independence of reliance on Earth. Any thoughts on that? Role of government. We heard a lot of good discussion on that this morning. The role of government and entrepreneurs and commercial space, things like that. How do we make it an affordable and sustainable? I think it's one of our big challenges. Big discussion between affordable architecture versus one that maybe is sustainable. So just some thoughts for you to read as we go through, maybe trigger some of your thoughts. But now's the time to open the floor and come forward and have some dialogue and some questions. So we have one right here.
Hello.
Introduce yourself and then.
My name is Scott Anderson. I'm from El Paso, Texas, and I work with students. I'm an educator. And when they ask me, why should we go? I say, because we can learn how to take care of our own planet by living on one that's not as user-friendly. And I think that one of the things that was omitted in most of these discussions was, what do we do after we learn how to go and come back and hang out there for a while? That we need to say, what benefit will there be for the residents of this planet, technology-wise? And the young lady mentioned this morning about learning of farming techniques and planetary benefits for here, because yes, we're still at the stage of toddling like that little boy and trying to reach out for the first time, but there's got to be a plan for going to college too. Mm-hmm. And so we need to, in my opinion, let the people of the United States know that there will be benefits. There will be benefits to, like so many of these technologies, are like aviation and all those things, and get the companies to look beyond the actual just the travel requirements.
Thank you. Comment. Very good comment. So so one of the things that I think also I found challenging is, when we talk about this journey, and it's going to take a long time, and it kind of plays into what Dr. Zubrin talked about of doing it quickly. If we don't have a goal that's reasonable in terms of its time frame, when you talk to young kids and tell them, well, you get your high school degree and get your college degree and then work your career, and maybe by the end of your career, we've got to change that dialogue.
You're the right age.
You're the right, yeah.
You're going to be the one, or you're going to help out.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. So other comments or questions from anyone that they'd like to bring to the forefront and discuss with the team. So got one coming out.
Hello, Gus Sherb, I'm from Philadelphia. So I've heard repeatedly the past couple of days discussion about Phobos, yet I have not heard convincing reasons to me, or maybe I'm the slow one in the room or something. I'm not understanding why this whole thing about Phobos. I've heard David Brin just say that it would allow us to have safe protection from solar storms, which I don't totally understand. I've heard that it could be a place that we can sort of orbit around and look for potential landing sites for humans to land on Mars, which I also don't really get that, since we have very good cameras on satellites and we could be doing the same thing without having people landing on Phobos and circling around before we actually land on Mars. So could you or others please speak up about Phobos? I mean, I'm open to hearing good reasons, but it just seems like a additional delay to me. Thank you.
So I can give you some of my thoughts, but yeah, if there are others, I know Lockheed Martin yesterday talked about their Mars base camp and starting off with Phobos and Deimos. A lot of people view Phobos missions a lot like the Apollo 8 missions, Apollo 10 missions, where you're not quite ready for the landing. You want to shake out the systems before you go to the surface. To get to Phobos, you need almost all of the elements other than the lander and the surface systems. You need the same transportation systems: the launch vehicle, the crew vehicles, the habitation systems, the guidance, the nav, the control, all those sorts of things. And so it can serve as a shakedown, test your systems, get all the way out to Mars, understand how to live and operate in deep space for long periods of time, while you're developing your landers and your surface systems. But it also comes with it some challenges. A mission to Phobos introduces some new, unique aspects from the human physiology perspective. You're in free space for the entire mission duration. So the zero-G gravity issues, Scott Kelly just demonstrated a 1-year mission. We'd need to extend that to 3 years in free space. So that introduces some new challenges. So you're getting some benefits of not having to develop your landers as quickly. So it delays those programmatic challenges, but it introduces the human element challenge. If you get to Phobos, you get to orbit, and then you descend and start operating on Phobos and get on the surface, you can block some of that radiation. Phobos can serve as a shield to reduce some of the radiation effects. So it's less hazardous than orbit, but it's not quite as good as being on the surface of Mars, because Mars also has an atmosphere as well. There are some physiological challenges. So it's that, like I talked yesterday in one of the panels, that we play a game of whack-the-mole. If you say, well, I want to reduce the challenges of EDL and delay those, well, I introduce new challenges in the architecture. So NASA is right now studying that. How does Phobos fit in? They see that it's compelling. And so they're studying that in terms of how it can serve into the overall plan. But it does introduce new aspects that they're trying to study and understand the pros and cons associated with it. There are also some discussions, Dr. Aldrin's discussed it a lot, and other people, about if you have humans in orbit, they can serve as an element of helping assemble the systems on the surface. So they can tele-operate things on the surface. We can do that from Earth. It's just a long time delay. And so they're studying ways of where, if you have really low latency teleoperations, how can that speed up the capabilities of being able to assemble and do advanced operations in preparation for the crews going to the surface. So that's something to just study. But it's all of those considerations have to be brought to bear to understand specifically how, what is the risk posture, what is the programmatic posture, how does it affect the schedule for the other missions that you want to fly, to determine really where Phobos fits into that path. So it's a good, very, very good question, and it's one that's being studied right now. Yeah, another question. If anybody else has a question, come on down to a mic so people online can hear.
Hi, Lee Irons, Deep Space Ecology. We've been hearing a lot about return on investment, especially with one of the recent panels here. People thinking, what's the money side of this? And I'd like to try and bring the attention back to human capital and innovation. As they've learned in some other industries, I think another person mentioned about oil industry looking 20, 30, 40 years out, There's a lot of human capital out there right now. I think we lost our sight of that in the 80s when things began to become about money. We kind of lost our way a little bit with the shuttle program, I think, wandering away from the Apollo program. There's a lot of young people out there. We lost a whole generation or two of people who grew up with Apollo and then didn't have anywhere to go with it. There's a lot of young people today that are starting their own efforts, starting their own independent research, finding anybody who's interested and who can be a mentor to help them get going. And I think that the group, the person, the company that figures out how to harness that energy and get those people together and get them collaborating and get them meeting each other is going to benefit from the human capital development and is going to benefit from the innovation that comes out of there. And there might not be any profit, 5 years, 10 years, ever, directly from that effort, but there will be a lot of spin-off. There will be a lot of economic energy going. I mean, just think about the run on Oklahoma when the land opened up. Imagining that happening on Mars. The land is now open. We've figured out how to live there. The land is open.
Yeah, good comment. So we got another one here.
I guess I just wanted to comment a little bit on the Phobos and just generally paths to Mars. So there's the straight shot, you go straight to Mars, you land on Mars, you go through the atmosphere. And Phobos, from that perspective, is kind of a distraction. But there is also the possibility of emerging, infrastructure and ecosystems when you look at the asteroid belt. Phobos and Deimos have very low gravity fields, meaning that landing a spacecraft on Phobos or Deimos would be very similar to landing something in the asteroid belt. And if you look at ways to commercialize space, we have deep space industries, we have the planetary resources. We have these companies that want to go out and mine asteroids. So if NASA takes an effort forward and says, hey, we're going to learn out how to land on a moon, which is basically an asteroid, has no atmosphere to speak of. The gravity, I think, is like 1/1000th that of Earth's.
Very small,
It would be a huge synergistic effort to jumpstart the asteroid economy, which the focus of this conference is obviously Mars, but I do want to say synergistically, Mars is just one destination out of the whole rest of the solar system. And I see that Phobos and Deimos are pretty big. You know, it's like putting in not quite as much money as if you were to land on Mars. There's the atmosphere, but you do get double bang for your buck. You get something that's like an asteroid mission, but you're also almost all the way to Mars. You still have to develop the landing infrastructure for Mars, but if you're very close to Mars, you have a forward operating base, that would be pretty useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're basically at Mars. I mean, getting all the way out to Mars, getting all the way out to Phobos, you're just a hop, skip, and a jump away from Mars. Just the EDL part, that's the hard part. Yeah, another question.
Yeah,
Comment.
how can we better engage the public?
Yes.
I heard a
How
lot of
can we?
people over the course of these 3 days talk about the Collier's magazine pictures of Wernher von Braun. I remember Walt Disney and Walter von Braun talking about going to the moon. Media is a lot more difficult to know where you want to put your effort. You don't just have 3 stations, but you know, today I'm going to go to the Air and Space Museum. Every time I come to town from Grand Rapids, I go there. They ought to have an exhibit on humans to Mars because all kinds of people cycle through there and they are already predisposed to this. But I guess my general question is, one, is the Air and Space Museum doing anything in this regard? And secondly, what is the effort to engage the public? I mean, who is putting out the press releases? We have lots of publications, but how are we going to engage the public? And perhaps the audience has some ideas, or maybe you'd like to respond to that. But I do wonder about the Air and Space Museum in particular.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with exactly what Air and Space. I mean, they collaborate with, of course, NASA all the time, but I'm not sure in terms of specifics. But, you know, one thing you did, you know, the Collier work brings up a thought, and I'd like to hear if anybody has any feedback on it. I think a lot of what people want to see, they see some of this new space type activities as being new. It's fresh, it's innovative. And I think that's a lot of what is a catalyst for some of the excitement there. Part of it, I think, is the narrative that we as a community send out there. We have a tendency to be very risk adverse, and we make it look boring. And so how do we make it exciting so we engage that public? Yeah.
So this is another.
Okay, go here and then we'll come over
Okay.
here.
This is another public support question, and I'm actually a student here at George Washington University. I'm a double major in physics and computer science. I've sort of followed the STEM wagon that's kind of been put in front of me for the last 5-10 years or so.
Right.
Right. Actually, I'll try not to have a tangent, but we have the Society of Physics students here, and I heard about this conference last year and heard about it at the last minute, and then signed up for this year and talked to a bunch of students as well, and trying to convince people to come. And I think there is a real problem in terms of how to engage. You talked about that 99% a bit. I mean, obviously, it's great there's commercialization in space going on, that you have, this wealthy kind of elite group that can fund this, and then you sort of have an academic elite too. You have to get through enough series of sort of testing and examination to sort of be in any position to make, to contribute. And sometimes I feel like it's hard to convince some of my fellow students who might have opportunities to go, work in the tech sector, or, go on to, pre-med and go to medical school. And there's so many more lucrative ways to sort of prove yourself. And I feel as though there's so much pressure on our generation to be economically driven and to make decisions, based on our employment, because that's becoming a bigger and bigger factor. How are you supposed to convince people that not only is it a worthwhile effort, but it has repercussions in so many other aspects of our life? Sometimes from a practical standpoint, it can be kind of hard to, make that, have that conversation with, either your superiors or even like your parents. How can you convince them that this is a good decision, not only economically, but one that, is going to benefit society? I sometimes think that's a hard discussion to have.
So your peers and your fellow students, do they see those other avenues as being more lucrative in terms of financial, or is it because they feel they can make more of a change and be a greater part of a change?
I mean, I think it's both. I mean, I think a lot of times people will be lured by sort of those initial Silicon Valley, starting salaries at like 100, 125,000. It's kind of hard to beat when you just have a bachelor's. Partially that, but I also think that it's that pressure of you need to make sure you have steady employment that is in a growth sector. And I think a lot of people sometimes think it's a little bit pie in the sky. I mean, I'm a big supporter of, we were talking about propulsion the other day. I mean, obviously I think ion-based propulsion, electric is good, but I've also been a long-term interested in chemical and nuclear. But a lot of these things that are longer term, when you have that 10-year timeline, it's hard to talk to kids who are finishing their undergrad, or might have, if you go to GW, you could have $200,000 in debt. You're so focused on the economic side, it's hard to make decisions outside of that. And I know it's a loaded question, but it's more about how can you get people that maybe aren't engaged right now in the discussion, that 90%, 99%, how can you get them to believe in this idea and to, maybe people talked about having skin in the game. How can you make it something that people believe in both as a dream and also economically?
Mm-hmm. Good point. That's a challenge. That's a very big challenge.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, good comment. That's one of those difficult ones. I just don't know how to. Collectively, we need to work on that and see if we can solve it.
And this may be more of a follow-up to that question. My name's Larry Dungan. I'm out at NASA Johnson. I'm a tech developer, hardware and software, and also I mentor a large number of students. We had 3 students just left. I have 7 students joining me this summer.
Mm-hmm. Good.
How do we kind of harness this current generation? We have limited resources, limited opportunities to bring students in, even new higher employment in. As an example, I keep 2 spots open through the NASA internship program, and I had over 300 to 400 applications a semester for those 2 spots.
That's great.
And so it's very, very competitive to just pick the best. And I know that Astronaut Abby had mentioned that, you bring 2 or 3 out, we're missing a lot of really great students. how do we harness them and bring that knowledge into the agency or into the programs? And then also, one of the challenges we see is that we have this great goal out at 2033. We don't have it broken down into near-term goals. We all like to have, what are we doing in 3 months? What are we doing in 6 months? Something that we can grab a hold of. You know, is there any ideas or guidance on how we're going to break this large journey into the small steps?
Yeah, so better definition of what that plan is, not in terms of specifically every year all the way out to 2030, but in the near term. Yeah, decision gates, key pathways. Okay, that's a good point.
I have a question.
Yes.
Years ago at the 100-year Starship, they had proposed on the public support to enlist the sci-fi writers like you have this morning. And my question is this. Recently, a lot of them have jumped on the bandwagon with the most inappropriate kind of science in there. Nothing really makes sense. And we've got a lot more self-publishing. What has NASA or what has the community, of scientists done to help provide information to writers so that they can write more, more intelligently and more realistically, so that the public, can take interest in what's going on?
So in terms of how we engage the writers, the actual
Yes,
journalists?
do you have some kind of commission or whatever that enlists writers that actually provide? David Brin mentioned a research assistant that he had, or someone who actually makes sure his science is correct. Do you have things like that for other writers?
That's a good idea. I know NASA does a lot in terms of, K through 12 education type activities, public affairs, press briefing type things, but you're trying to get more to the regular journalists. So that's a good point. Yeah.
You don't have anything right now. is what you're saying.
I don't work for NASA anymore, so yeah, I think that's something that we can. It's a good message we can take back to NASA, and so maybe that's something we need to consider. So,
There is a program, I think it's through the National Academy of Sciences. That
do you want to come up?
Yep.
So Joe Cassidy has a comment. So, and then we'll get to you.
No, that is a really good point. And we heard about something last year at Red, which was an attempt Explore Mars had to bring together some of the non-traditional folks. We were out in LA, so we were close to Hollywood. And there is a program through I believe it's the National Academy of Sciences, where they actually try to connect up screenwriters and creative people with real scientists and try to do just what you said, to infuse more good science into these things. Thank you, Chris. Science and Entertainment Exchange.
Okay.
And you can probably Google that, right, and find information on it.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you.
So just to echo that, I think Carl Sagan would have said the same thing, is be responsible with the medium of television or entertainment and what you're portraying.
Yeah, good comment.
I am a presidential management fellow at NASA, and this is my second year at NASA. So I'm struggling with a question of, what does a NASA employee actually do? Is it a contractor that actually gets us to where we're going? Is it Boeing and Lockheed Journey to Mars and their vehicles, and then I am just coming along for the ride? Or should I be on the other side of the house? Should I be a contractor, not like a project manager? Should that be my future if I actually want to build something?
Well, so that's a personal question. So you have to, look internally to yourself. Within NASA, you've got lots of different opportunities. What field you want to go into and what role you want to play within it. Sounds like this died. So help me with your question a little bit more.
Well, this is actually getting at his question.
Yeah.
So I have my mountain of debt from grad school.
Right.
And then I'm going to have to balance that with a GS scale, when on the contractor side of the house, I can still be doing great work, I can still pay back my loans, and I'm still going on the journey to Mars. And is that a different workforce question than anything that's been asked here today?
I mean, it's a different role, but yeah, you're still on the journey. You're supporting it from either if we're working for NASA or if you're a contractor, you can still participate in that journey.
So I guess I'm just trying to get at what is being actually portrayed, and do myths need to be dispelled before people start going down a certain path?
Okay. Done. Another question. If you have a question, you want to come on down to the mic or a comment.
We're talking about engaging people.
Yes.
I was thinking of this as a way of funding as well as engaging people. If there were to be issued by the government Mars bonds, and if you want to get children involved in it, since it's their future, maybe some of them in very low denominations that a child could buy into. And I have intentions of contacting my congressional representative and my senator about this. But I think that would be one way of getting both children and adults interested in it. Adults could buy the higher value bonds, and the kids could buy the, maybe a $5 bond, but at least they would say they contributed to a mission to Mars.
Okay.
And these would not be redeemable until humans set foot on Mars.
Okay, there you go. Is there another comment?
Well, one of the things that I've heard is how do we communicate this to a larger audience? And I think we have a lot of good ambassadors right here.
Right.
Buzz had to leave, but some of you may remember a picture on the cover of MIT Technology Review a few years ago with his headshot, and you can Google this. And he says, "You promised me Mars colonies, and all I got was Facebook."
Nice.
And I love that picture. At first, I thought, well, that says something about where we put our values as a society. But it also speaks to one of the issues that we've been talking about here this morning is how do you get the other 99% on board with these types of things? And so I have a specific request for that background is that with all of us that attended this conference as ambassadors, perhaps the Explore Mars organization could put out an email to all of us with 5 talking points. Because when I go home this weekend, I've got social activities. And if I start talking to people about what I did this week, a lot of them are going to go like, what? That's so far out there that doesn't even connect with my daily world. And I think we could use a lot of us to help message it if we kind of were on the same page and didn't take back different messages.
That's a good
Thank
idea.
you.
Very good idea. Okay. So we've got a question over on this side.
Oh, yeah,
Go ahead.
Okay.
So
Comment.
TRL levels and public perception. So NASA has done a really good job about talking about things like warp drive and EM drive and the Q thruster and things like that that are really awesome, and I think that's a great job. But I do see a lack of tangible near future things that are in the public perception. So, for example, I remember the Jupiter Icy Moons Orbiter about 10 years ago, right? Does anybody else remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Few people, right? That's a near-term technology that can make a major difference in our ability. Like, we're talking still decades out, but we're not talking 100-year, which I still love the 100-year. I don't want to be like, oh, we shouldn't do that, but we should do both in parallel. And I think the public sees this, oh, we're going to get warp drive, we're going to go to Mars in a day, and they don't quite understand and grasp the journey that we're really on, that it takes steps. And I think that one plot that was shown is a good start, but I'd really like to see, instead of promising everything and saying we're going to go there in a day, if we could have some kind of thing for the public that better talks about the steps. And I know that that's difficult, but it's something that we should really do so the public can understand where we're at and where we're going.
So the personal view of what it takes to get there, Hollywood makes it look too easy. So how do we show the true magnitude of the adventure and compel and actually convey that better? Is that basically what you're saying?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
I guess just get more people on board. Like, we talked about Silicon Valley versus NASA, right? where do the best and the brightest individuals go? They go where they see a future and a growth potential. If you keep talking about very futuristic ideas, 100-year ideas, those will attract some people, but the most people, like the Bill Gates, the Steve Jobs, those types of people will not go into the space industry if they don't see a near-term solution that they can have in their lifetime.
Okay.
So that's kind of my thought, is I want to see what is the, in my lifetime, like, you know, sure we have plans, DRA architectures and things like that, but we don't really convey that to the public very well. If this is our plan, this is what we're doing. We talk about heavy lift vehicles like the SLS, but we don't talk about what we're going to do with it, what we're going to build, where we're going to go to the public enough. At least that's kind of my perception, is that I talk to people about space exploration, and most of them, the first thing they'll ask me is like warp drive or something like that, rather than, you know, what about this rocket? What's it doing? Where's it going? How much can it carry? I don't know, something like a game would almost be, you know, Kerbal Space Program, honest, is probably one of the best educational tools that's ever come out. Like, it's a game you play, you see how the planets work, you fly around. So, you know, I guess things like that. But it's more of a comment, an open-ended question for everyone that how do we get people on board with things that they can act on in the next 10, 20, 30 years? And I know that kind of requires a vision and a plan and a leader. And that's something that I maybe would be another question, is where is the leadership going to come from? Will we see, you know, I always say a good project demands a king, that you need someone in charge, and maybe they don't pick the best plan, but at least they pick a plan and they follow through with it. So it's kind of a side question, but.
Right, good articulate visionary, yeah. Yeah, good point. Okay, so we had a comment over here.
Yeah, my name is Dave Jones. I'm a small business owner from New Jersey. One of the frustrations that I felt throughout this whole thing is I keep hearing, you know, the term buy down the risk. And it's ironic that some of the Lockheed personnel have said it, because we're spending trillions of dollars invading other countries on war, on defense, when we could be spending billions, you know, just landing on another planet, exploration. You know, I see it as inevitable that we're going to have colonies on the moon, on Mars, and I think that we should start now. I think it's too late for us to start. In the 1950s, there was about 2.8 billion people on the planet. Right now, there's about 7.5 billion people on the planet. We've been using the resources of the Earth, and we are the most invasive species here. If we don't evolve past this planet, I don't think our race has a chance of survival. I don't know if we can survive without going to another planet as a civilization. That's all.
Okay, good comment. So, yeah, go ahead.
I very much feel like an outsider here, not just because of my nationality, but also my background. I'm originally a physicist, an engineer, but for the last 8 years I've worked in stand-up comedy, which sounds like an unusual combination, but it leads itself very much to science communication, where I find myself as being an avenue for sharing what we're trying to achieve in space. And the number one thing that I've seen over the last 3 days is a lack of narrative storytelling, where we talk about a clear vision, we talk about international collaboration, speak about all these sort of things, and then I sit and watch a panel of 5 old white guys from aerospace engineers talking about how they're going to orbit around Phobos. The public doesn't care about Phobos. Most people wouldn't even know where Phobos is if you told them. That 99% that you're talking about doesn't engage. I also happen to be a Mars One candidate, which, say whatever you like about the mission design or the funding or whatever, their ability to grab people's attention is extraordinary because they have that clear vision. We are going to put people on Mars in 10 years. That might slip. There's a good chance it will slip. It might not happen at all. But that clarity of vision to turn around and say, we will put humans on Mars. NASA's end goal with the journey to Mars that stage 3 step we're talking about is being Earth independent, e.g. colonising or living on Mars. No one wants to say colonising on Mars, but ultimately that's what captures people's attention. So I think the biggest thing that has sort of come out of this specifically for me, and I hope it's the thing that a lot of people take away from this, is that you need that clarity of vision. There's a very, I hate to use the word dead wood, but there is a lot of old history of doing this is the way we did it before, this is the way that we've done it for 50 years. And it takes organisations who come up with an original idea, not even necessarily an original idea, an idea like let's go one way to Mars, or let's bring our first stage boosters back, or try and build things up from the ground rather than just building on what has been done in the past. It's not necessarily a question, it's probably just a comment from the last few days. There's not that clarity, there's not that storytelling, and that's what we as a species respond to. We're a storytelling species.
Yeah, I think that's a very good comment. You know, the narrative and the story that we tell, we need to do a better job at that. Very good point. Yeah.
Yes, had a comment, observation, picking up off of some of what this young man said and others, is that there does seem to be a lack of a path of integration among some of the frontier avenues of science into the NASA and the space programs. I mean, planetary sciences, biological sciences, you do see immediately like some frontier activity going on. When you start to look at young people, they get interested in things like what's happening with breakthroughs in quantum physics, what's happening with high energy dense plasmas, things like that that lead to fusion or quantum computing, what have you. But the integration of those technologies and pathways towards the development of those technologies is not clearly there in what NASA's doing now. Though it could be, and it's talked about here and there, and there's long visions of what could be, the immediate pathway of how you could be part of those various domains of science and how you would be integrated into this larger kind of mission, it's just not there and it's not clear. And I think if it were, that would draw a lot more young, engaged physicists in particular into the space program, into the kinds of things that NASA's doing.
Okay, very good. So, good comment there. Yeah, another one here.
Yeah, I'd like to, is this working?
Yeah, it's working.
I'd like to address the idea. I think we've got two issues here that seem the same but are really quite different. And if I can express that in terms that make some sense, give me a chance to do that. There's the issue of bringing people into the space industry that are really well educated, really highly motivated, really understand science, really understand mathematics. We need people like that. That's one issue. But there's another issue, and the issue has come up several times about engagement. And we need the engagement of a lot of people to push forward to do the things we want to do relative to going to Mars. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of enthusiasm among the general public right now. And a gentleman mentioned a little while ago, we have a generation of kids who don't even know what Apollo was. It's heartbreaking. And they go to history class and they don't even hear it in there. So what's going on? Where do you find out? How do you get the kids who are really going to be the ones that are going to be able to give us this enthusiasm to get this thing motivated? Where are you going to get them? Well, how are you going to get them into it? Well, if they're not being taught that in school, then what? Mm-hmm. So let me just put this in perspective. I grew up, I'm a Sputnik person, okay? When Sputnik went up in 1959, okay, or 57, when it happened, I was like out of my mind. I couldn't believe it. So I got interested in that. I got interested in science. But that's not going to happen again. But the interesting thing was that after that, we became interested in it. We became motivated because of survival, because the Soviet Union was going to beat us. And so everybody was interested in it. Every kid looked at the pictures. Every kid studied about it, looked at it. Every kid tried to find out more about it. Why? Because we thought the Soviet Union was going to beat us. So we had this enormous motivation to do it. That's not going to happen again. But what we might be able to do is to get the teachers who are not even related to this anymore. They don't even see it anymore as being an important issue, to put this into the curriculum in such a way that kids get to see more of it. What I'm saying is I know what the STEM stuff is all about, and I push that stuff myself as a math teacher. But on the other hand, we need the general public to be in it. And if the teachers can get the kids started in it at an early age, that's how we're going to do it. We don't want another generation of kids who don't know anything about this. So what my recommendation is, back in 1959, back in 1960, early 60s, there was a thing called the National Science Foundation that went out and educated teachers, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the people who benefited from that. And they were nice enough to pay my way through a master's degree. Can't we get some kind of governmental agency that can come through with that kind of a program again that would be designated toward more of this kind of education? And it's awareness. It's not making more STEM people. It's not making more engineers and scientists. It's awareness. It's understanding the past and what might be into the future. Get that into the curriculum. State boards of education may have to get involved. But certainly there's an education process that has to take place at the level of the teachers. They're the ones that are going to pass it down. Right now, it's not getting passed down. I know it sounds like I'm on a soapbox. Maybe I am. But I think it's got to come from some organization that's going to take some umbrella responsibility for getting the teachers to understand this, motivating them to teach this stuff, okay? And also, whatever you can do with state boards of education, they're rough groups to deal with, that would get them to put it into the regular curriculum, which right now, if you look at your own state, nothing in there. Okay? So again, thank you for your attention. I took more time.
Thank you. We got a question over here on this side.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. I'm Zachary Ontiveros, by the way. I'm a student from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. There was a gentleman here, but I guess he left already. He mentioned that he believes the solution to overpopulation is getting off the planet. And I agree with that to an extent. This is the planet that we have right now. And I think that we certainly need to take care of it and be resourceful. And, you know, it's great that we're focusing our attention far away on Mars and on the moon. But I also believe it's important that we bring this idea of sustainability of our current planet into our classrooms across the United States. So I just want to make that quick comment, but the gentleman's not here anymore, so.
Okay, we're starting to run a little bit late, so a couple more questions.
Brett, I'm Jack Vault, owner. I've come to these things for
Yes.
many years. In 1999, there was a Canadian science fiction film about the first manned Mars mission. It was privately financed. The people who made it happen sold the television rights. There was corporate logos on the side of the rocket, etc. This is crass. It's commercialism, but there's not enough talk about how do we get funding. You know, everybody, let's go over and talk to our congressman and get government involved. And guess what? Trump has already said if he gets elected, hey, we got trillions of dollars in infrastructure to fix. I'm not interested in space. Let's start looking at some alternatives to raising money to do some of these missions. And that's my suggestion.
So if we're in Washington, so if they could rewrite the laws where NASA could advertise on their rockets, then maybe we could do that. Next question.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Mike Grossman, and I'm a cartoonist and comic book writer. So this is a
nice.
comment I have. Yeah, thank you. I've been following along here the last couple of days, and so I've been working on a story for about 4 or 5 years that deals with your industry and Mars colonization exactly. Also takes a much wider viewpoint of everything that we need to do in space over the next 150 years. So a lot of comments have been made how to best engage the public, and we all know the success that Andy Weir's book, The Martian, had. So that is what I'm seeking to replicate on an even greater scale within public perception, media and entertainment. So to put it shortly, I'm trying to create something that will be like the Star Wars of the new generation. That'll give as much groundswelling of support for what everyone in this room has been trying to do for many years already. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I think we're getting the hook here. Yeah. How do you want, one more question, comment?
The
Or?
thing is, have one more question. I'm sorry about that because we have a meeting at Congress trying to get.
They've got to go
things
march
on
the hill.
ground,
They've got to go
literally.
march the hill.
And so we are kind of bound by time. Otherwise, I would be happy to continue doing something until the night.
So one more comment right there.
Just a quick question, maybe a little bit more concrete. I would assume you'd like more students to come to these conferences, and are you planning on hosting another one next year in the same location?
We might.
Do you want to take the mic?
If we do, we will try to get more students. Yes.
What would you say would be in terms of trying to attract more students, what do you think are the most important sort of talking points or selling points to get people to come?
Timing also, that they know that they can come and it's doesn't interfere with their exams or whatever.
Yeah, we're definitely doing another one next year in DC, but we're also pondering one of the things that got brought up a lot, particularly after Janet Ivey's thing on Tuesday night. We're thinking of doing maybe even a special day for STEM education. That's not determined yet, but we're thinking about a lot of different ideas to really focus on that and bring in a lot more kids. So we're happy to hear any ideas on that as well. If you have ideas where we might be able to bring a huge number of students, we're happy to listen.